This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Welcome back. I think I need to be third on the marquee for this show between Ira and Ira's drapes behind him. Like I think Ira's drapes have jumped ahead of me on the marquee for this show. Great questions so far. I want to get to some of these before we move on to the games coming up and also Turk Nowitzki, which is my new favorite name. David asked a good question, Ira, and it's kind of a philosophical question about the Heat and just kind of how they do things. But he asked, what have you noticed that the Heat do differently to try to uncover some of these gems and develop them? Guys like Yurtseven, Strus, Martin, guys like that. And you get somebody like Caleb Martin, who was basically cast aside by Charlotte. I mean, these are players that other teams have had shots at and even worked with directly. And I remember James Borrego, after they let go of Caleb Martin, basically saying something to the effect of, oh, the Heat will do well with him. He fits exactly what they do. Well, why is it that he fits so well with the Heat? He's been a real impact player for Miami, and they couldn't find a spot for him in Charlotte. And I understand that they have a lot of wing players over there, but getting back to the question here, what is it that the Heat do differently that they're able to find and develop these untapped gems and players that are going to make an impact on a team that I think is a contender at this point?
You know, it's interesting. When I speak to Adam Simon ahead of the draft, I always ask him, you never have any draft picks, you trade them all, so why do you spend so much time in the whole process? And he always has told me, because we cycle back to players, because you build a file on them, because they might not be your player today or tomorrow, but you might have a chance to get them down the road, and you want to know who they are as much as what they are. So you'll see their statistics. Max Strus, training camp in Boston, playing for the Bulls G League team, the Windy City Bulls. You'll see Caleb Martin, same thing. Greensboro Swarm, a little time with them. You'll see Omar Yurtseven, Oklahoma City Blue, Turkish national team. But they know which players are willing to work. And I know that sounds, Clay, it's like in our business. It's like when you interview someone to work at Local 10 or the Sun Sentinel, they come in and they go, so how many days off a week do I get? How many hours do I work? Yeah. What's the vacation plan here? And you realize who you're getting. And then you get guys who are gym rats who are willing to go in there and put in all the time. And even the whole Omar Yurtseven thing, this didn't start in Summer League. It didn't start in the preseason. It didn't start now. It started as soon as the Turkish national team was eliminated from the Olympic qualifier in June. He said, I could go home to Turkey, finally spend some time with my family, but I'm going down to the gym in Miami, and I'm going to work for a full month before my first Summer League game in Sacramento. So to answer your question, obviously in my typical long-winded kind of way, they find the guys who are willing to put in the work. They find guys who say to themselves, I know I'm only at point A, and other teams might think I only can get to point D, but I think I can get further down the alphabet. I think there's more to me. That's who Max Strus is. All Max Strus does is talk about the work. All he does is talk about, I could call Anthony Carter, the former Heat player, now an assistant coach, anytime 24/7, and he will meet me at the gym, which means he wants to be at the gym anytime. I spoke to Omar Yurtseven when he wasn't playing. I asked him about his typical day. He says, I do the same work as everyone, and then I come back, use my thumbprint, get into the gym, and I work out at night also. There are certain guys who are willing to put in the extra effort, but there also are, Clay, certain guys so talented they don't have to. There are guys, there's a guy in the Heat right now, played golf out in Phoenix, first guy off the court after practice, but he's pretty damn good as a point guard, and he leads your team, and no one's going to question his conditioning because of what he does for you, so that's the difference. If you're highly skilled, you'll be fine in this league, but it's the players the Heat find who need to refine their skills and take it to another level, and it all comes down to this. Are you willing to put in the work? And some of this work is unceasing. So many times, Clay, you'll check for Local 10, or the Heat practicing today, and it'll say Miami Heat will not practice today. What they mean is we're not practicing as a team. But so many of these individual guys will spend hours on the practice court honing their craft. So I sort of say, if you want a couple of words instead of this long-winded thing, if they get craft owners, that's who they're looking for. Guys who are willing to put in the work to get better. That's Yurtseven, that's Martin, that's Strus, that's Duncan Robinson, that's Gabe Vincent. They don't need the polish of college careers because there's still more that you can find under the surface.
Yeah, and so to the question, it's just as much about the Heat and how much they work to develop these guys. And by the way, it's having assistant coaches who are willing and able to put in all that extra work too, as it is finding the players who are willing to put in that work as well. So it's a little bit of all of that. It's identifying the traits in the player first that you can work with, and also knowing that they're going to have that crazy work ethic. They're going to be able to be willing to go in and do that. And by the way, I'm sure you've heard this story or something similar, that the Heat had, my understanding, John Collins and Bam Adebayo pretty closely rated coming into the draft. And Bam's reaction to doing extra work, and when he was asked to do things, was at a level that they were very comfortable taking him where they were. And it kind of set him apart a little bit from Collins. Not that Collins doesn't have a work ethic, but that Bam kind of had that mentality that took him over the top when they were comparing those two players. So to answer the question, that's the kind of thing that they look for. It's not just the physical traits.
If I could interject, even being here in Atlanta, that's the story now with the Hawks. John Collins is complaining he's not getting plays called for him, that they don't run offense for him, that it's Trae Young's team. I haven't heard that from Bam. Bam has been the fulcrum. He doesn't get a lot of shots. He usually lets others play off. As a matter of fact, I think you and I have been in this camp for a little bit of a while, is be more assertive, Bam. Be stronger. Right. You see that on the chat there all the time there. On our chat here on the Slomin's Home Shield, security show. You can see that people want him to do more, but Bam's willing to play within the system. He doesn't want to be a star. He wants to let it happen organically. So you're right. The other question I liked is, at the Chicago pre-draft camp, they were bringing players through in the hotel room. It was a great question. This was when Rodney McGruder was on the team. And Eric Spoelstra said, if I roll a ball out there and it's you or Rodney McGruder, who's going to get the ball? Who's going to go on the floor? Who's going to dive for the ball? And who's going to get the ball first? That's exactly the kind of player they're looking for. A player like that. Rodney's nickname is, the scavenger. That's who he was. That's who they want. Because you know what? Pat Riley will find his stars in free agency. He has all those rings. Chris Bosh told us that when he went to the Hall of Fame. He has all of Mickey Harris's money. He has South Beach. He has the weather. He has the Heat culture. He has the Heat's 3 championships, the legacy of Dwayne Wade and the Big Three. So he'll get his high-end stuff. But as we're seeing this season, it's the other guys, it's the complimentary guys who through the 82-game regular season especially can make such a difference. The Vincents, the Struces, the Robinsons, the Caleb Martins, those guys matter too.
Yeah, so to answer the question, kind of put a bow on this thing, it's not that the Heat have some like magic potion that these guys walk in and all of a sudden instantly like, oh, we figured out something with these guys physically that nobody else has. Look, it's like anything else in life, Ira, and like I don't want me to sound like a dad here, but like if you bust your butt and you work hard and you're willing to put in the time and the effort, you can do pretty much anything. And so I think it's all about the players that are willing to do what it takes to reach their potential, and that's the big thing here. Two Extreme masks. You see this Hawks game tonight and Friday as winnable games, and you've got the back-to-back, and it's always tough when you look at playing the same team back-to-back. It's tough to beat the same team back-to-back in this league when everybody is so close to even, and yet there's something that's off with this Hawks team this year, and maybe it's something like what you just said with John. There's not the synergy there that we saw with last year's Hawks team where everything just seemed to click. So how do you view these two upcoming games? And is it one of those things that, despite the fact the Heat are going to be shorthanded again, at least for this first game, that they can go in there and find a way to steal a win tonight?
This is really interesting because we have a real parallel, Clay, that we could draw here. You remember this. Last year, the Heat played the Hawks in consecutive home games. It was a Sunday and a Tuesday. In the Sunday game, they wiped the Hawks off the court. They humiliated them. Lloyd Pierce was the coach that Sunday. Lloyd Pierce was not the coach Tuesday night, 2 nights later, at what was then American Airlines Arena, now FTX Arena. Nate McMillan stepped in, and they wiped the Heat off the court on that Tuesday, if you remember. Their rebounding advantage, they muscled up. Similar situation. The Hawks are coming into a 2-game set against the Heat, a little different, home and home, not at the same arena both nights. They need to find themselves. They have that opportunity right now. Another point, the Heat also play the Hawks next week. So 3 of the 4 regular season games against Atlanta would be contested over a 10-day stretch.
Crazy.
Last season, because of a late season loss by the Heat to the Atlanta Hawks, The Miami Heat, you are
Who
Miami
were playing
Heat.
nobody, by the way. I remember that game, and it was like that was the game you're like, you win that game, you win the division.
Yes.
And they got blasted by a very, if I'm not mistaken, didn't Trae Young not play in that game?
No one played for the Hawks that night, and the Heat were humiliated. So the Heat, instead of finishing fourth, winning the division, winning the tiebreaker with Atlanta, hosting the New York Knicks, who were terrible, instead, they wind up going to number 6, getting swept out of the playoff by the Bucks. You know, it's interesting. A lot of people ask me at the Sun Sentinel and other places, why do they still list NBA division? They don't mean a damn thing in the playoff seedings. It's 1 through 6 in the conference, make the playoffs, 7 through 10, make the play-in. But the second tiebreaker after head-to-head is division championships. So if you finish tied with a Knicks team or someone at 2-2, but you, the Heat, win the Southeast, and the Knicks, of course, because they're the Knicks, don't win the Atlantic, then you get the tiebreaker there. So let's look at our division, the Heat's division right now. Orlando's horrible. Washington's kind of iffy. Charlotte's kind of iffy. So probably for the Heat to win the division, they're competing against Atlanta, at least long view based on talent there. So the Heat really need to win 2 of these next 3 to position themselves. So these are big divisional games, even in a league where divisions aren't as important as what they once were.
And by the way, they know that. I mean, they're no dummies there. And, you know, that's where, like, it almost feels like to me, Ira, and we'll see how this plays out, but, like, if Jimmy is close, but you're a little concerned about having him play tonight, you don't want him to travel, you don't want him to take a chance on that ankle, have him ready to go on Friday. And, you know, again, that's not like breaking news here that we think he's going to play on Friday, but, like, if you're choosing between the two, it's a safer bet to have him come back on Friday when he's at home. And I'm glad you brought up the point of last year, Ira, because this is something I wanted to get into at the end of this second segment. That game last year in Atlanta was one of 2 regular season games that I remember looking at after the season, and even in real time, but looking back and saying, oh, we should have known X about this team at that point. That Atlanta game, when you get blown off the floor and you had everything to play for, and it was really easy to look at the tiebreakers and know how immensely important that game was to Miami. And Atlanta just played like they wanted it more. It was just this strange confluence where it was like the team that was lesser talented came out and blew you off the floor because they seemed to want it more. And the other game, Ira, that I remember distinctly, and it was in March, it was at home against Phoenix. And Phoenix came in and absolutely blasted a completely healthy Heat team. Now, this was before they made the move for Victor Oladipo. Mm-hmm. It was before the trade deadline. Back because remember last year the calendar was off a little bit. But it was the first game of the season where the Heat were completely healthy, and I saw them against a contender. And you talk about the difference between contenders and challengers all the time. Right. I watched that game, and it wasn't that Phoenix did anything crazy. It was just that they were on a completely different level than Miami in that game. And so fast forward to this year and what happened over the weekend in Phoenix. And again, this is a Heat team playing a much different style of basketball than they'll play if for whatever reason, and we're not making a prediction here, but if for whatever reason they ended up playing Phoenix in the NBA Finals. But it was a remember me game. It was one where they went in there and blew the doors off of Phoenix. It was almost kind of like what Atlanta did to Miami last year when they didn't have anybody. But it was one of those where it was like, okay, this Miami team is finding a way against even teams that are at the top. They don't look overmatched, even when they're undermanned, if that makes any sense.
Right.
Last year, I felt that way in a couple of games. This year, it feels like there's a different mentality. And look, regular season, there's a lot more games left to play. But I felt in those 2 games that there was a difference between this year and last year.
Except I don't know who the hell the Heat are. Literally, now that we have a new sponsor with Slomin's Home Shield, I can almost talk to you every week and say, Clay, this is our first show of the season. Because until the Heat get back to who they are, let's look at tonight's game in Atlanta, for example. You don't have Jimmy Butler. You don't have Bam Adebayo. Markieff Morris is still out also. So you still have guys who are your rotation players. And I want to get at some point, we need 2 hours. I'll have to talk to Big O about this, about what this Heat rotation is. But this isn't the real Heat. I love what these courageous young warriors have done the last week. It's staying afloat on that West Coast trip that included a postponement. But this isn't the real Heat. I don't know if Max Strus is going to be in the playoff rotation. I don't know if Caleb Martin is going to be in the playoff rotation. I don't know if Kyle Guy is going to be on the roster, let alone a Chris Silva. It's almost like I'm waiting for real season to start. Like, hey, this is kind of some fun, wacky stuff with these guys. But when does the real season start? It's almost like the NFL playing a 16-game exhibition season or 17 and then playing 5 games for the regular season. I'm still waiting to see. I don't know who the real Heat are. Like, especially at my age, it's hard to remember back to November or October when they were all out there running together again. Since the last week of November, there has not been a single game that Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Kyle Lowry have played together. I don't know who the hell they are.
Let me ask you this, Ira, as we're getting into break here, because there are a few questions about this. You mentioned talking to Udonis Haslem about potentially renouncing his roster spot if you need one. What value is KZ Okpala bringing right now? And why instead would you not renounce his rights?
Well, you because of the salary cap, because you have to find a way to offload that money to stay under the luxury tax. Of course, if I wrote this in my answer,
so it would be accelerated onto the cap, basically, is what you're saying.
Basically, it's not accelerated. It counts for this year, so it counts toward the luxury tax. They don't have room for a full roster spot for a minimum salary unless they take KZ's minimum salary and offload it right there. So, Clay, it comes down to this: if you're asking me which would the Heat prefer, an open roster spot or KZ Okpala? The unknown or the known, they'd rather have the open roster spot, but they can't. You see this in all salary cap leagues. You make your deal with the devil, you give a 3-year guarantee contract. Now you have to work off of that money. And again, and it's the theme in our show here every week, you've already traded 3 second-round picks to trade for KZ Okpala. Mm-hmm. Can you afford to include a sweetener of another one and make it 4 second-round picks to get the guy and to excise the guy? It's a lot. So I think right now, it's sort of like what I said at the top of the show. Your 14th and 15th man shouldn't really matter and sure as hell won't in the playoffs anyway. Would another player instead of KZ be more productive and helpful? Yeah. Would KZ have had every chance these last 2 weeks if he didn't have the wrist injury? Yes. But he wasn't there. But sometimes you have to live with your personnel decisions only, as surely the Dolphins and other teams in town can tell you.
Yeah, and look, we've talked before about when Mickey Arison is perfectly happy to pay the luxury tax, and it's when you've got that championship type team. And maybe there is a conversation at some point that you're able to do that. But so to answer the question, it's more about the finances involved here,
yes,
as it is the player. So
I also love how we blow through all of our breaks here, that if this was Clay on Local 10, the weather guy would be getting pissed off at him right now when they gave him 4 minutes and he's into 7. But hey, as Big O tells us, it's the internet, it's free form. Our good friends from Slomin's Home Shield will get their commercials anyway. So Clay, format it however you want.
Yeah, and look, it when it's on TV, they tell you to take it out of sports. That's why they put us at the end, because it's easier to cut us out. All right, on the other side, we're going to talk about Turk Nowitzki, and we're also going to talk about these upcoming games on the schedule and how we see these next few games playing out. Also, please keep dropping your questions. It's been great, and smash that like button. We're back right here on Inside the Paint.
I'll be back with the weather in a few minutes. Thank you, Clay.
And
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.